What's up?
Yo, feels like we just did this.
This is recording number 3, but it's only 2.5 minutes of work, so it's not bad. Hopefully we've rallied and are ready to go. What's up?
Yeah. Oh, not much. Just wrapping up some stuff before the end of this week, and I don't know that I'll get any work done next week. So, looking forward to the holidays. How about you guys?
Same. I'm trying to take tomorrow off. We'll see if I'm able to do that, but I don't know. I've launched a couple of bigger features around messaging again, so a lot of
Ooh, what's
kind of
that?
visitor messaging. So before we had it limited to only your students could message you. Now anyone can.
Cool. Now you can spam everyone.
It was a cool feature to add. We designed it to where it wasn't too much work to add. And like since we launched messaging at Christmas, we were able to release it. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, that's cool. And you guys are doing like, the guest messaging is like, kept track of as like is it just a user's browser cookies, or do you just, as long as the connection's open, that's a customer or whatever, an unauthenticated conversation?
Yeah, it's a cookie and it
Yeah.
actually maps to like a visitor record. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, because you can also do like email notifications. So like if a creator's away, we prompt and be like, "Hey, do you want to just get an email when they message you back?"
Okay, cool. Yeah, dude, that's a great feature to have, especially when you look at intercom and the other alternatives and how expensive they are. It's great to have that as a basically included feature for free, especially, which is funny because like you go to intercom and it's like, well, you can get this feature for $30 a month and this other one for $50 a month, and you're like, you're paying ad hoc per feature. Seems kind of strange, but
Yeah.
must work.
The other thing Spencer, the CEO, did that was really cool is he made it free to like all our plans.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool because like the work I did impacted everyone. So
Literally everyone.
all the peoples. But yeah, no, I'm off next week and a little bit of the week after. So I'm excited to rest. I'm just trying to decide if I want to. I've pushed pretty
This is
hard
like,
December.
was this like an extreme version of deploying on Friday? You're like, deploy day before vacation?
I deployed. So I've had it like feature flagged for a while, and then deployed and turned off the feature flag yesterday. I had somebody helping me. My coworker Basil was doing a lot of work, which helped me be able to deliver this. Helped us be able to deliver it.
Andrew, how are you doing? How's things in the holidays?
I'm doing great, and I am getting ready for the break too. I think I'll be off for like 2 weeks, and I'm excited because there are a couple things that I want to do for Code Fund that aren't really things I need to be spending my time right now doing. But there's a ton of stuff, mostly cleanup, that I want to do over a few days for this break because we just launched a new skin for the app. And today I went in and deleted all the old theme vendor, all the views and things like that. And there are a lot of dependencies that we still have laying around that aren't used. And there's a lot of helper methods that I've been sticking was active support deprecations in. And I'm going to clean house, and I am so excited.
It's always a very good feeling to go through and do that sort of stuff. I enjoy it. It's like when you're cleaning your room finally. It feels good afterwards.
Yeah, and I'm not interested in cleaning my room, so this is the next best thing.
Dude, we can make a business like Code Maids. We just go in and clean stuff up for you.
I dig it.
I would pay. I would pay a lot.
Yeah, something about refactoring code is like one of my favorite things. We recently had fun doing that. With you asked for a code review in the Go Rails Slack channel, and I was like, oh, this sounds like fun. So thanks for that. But it was a good, half hour or something just sitting down, like refactoring some code I've never seen before, which, part of that is like, it's good because if you've never seen it before, you don't know the intentions and stuff. And so then it really forces you to like think about it and figure out what is this like, what's this conditional or this block trying to do? And can we give it a name? And once you start to understand its intent, then you like have a very clear name for it. Whereas like if you're the first person hacking through it, trying to make it work in the first place, it's harder to put names on things that way because like you're kind of familiar with the steps you had to work through, trying to figure out how do we even need to approach this in the first place. And then you forget about like, it feels like all one big blob. So I had a lot of fun doing that. And it made me want to go back through a bunch of my old code too and Hatchbox and Go Rails and stuff and clean some other things up. But yeah.
Yeah, that was number one, super helpful. I really appreciate you doing that. That code base was originally forked from another action that wasn't working, and I wanted to add a whole bunch of capabilities to it. And that action was just one giant Ruby file.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where like that pattern of like that file I sent you was like a big file with no classes, kind of just linearly going through and doing things. And I had started to refactor because I'd started to pull in other, or basically factoring things out into classes and stuff, but hadn't quite gotten there with that specific file. And then as like I went from that original fork, and then people added onto it, and then different styles started getting introduced to it. And then I just kind of I was doing like a big change anyway, and when I got to that file I was like, I just don't like, my brain is so spent on this project, and I can't remember the last time I wrote like straight Ruby without using Rails.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that was a big part of like what was stopping me.
That's a funny thing too, because you always see these like posts on Reddit and other places that are like, where do I put my form objects and my domain objects and service objects? And it's like, you guys remember like Rails is just a Ruby, a Ruby app. Like there happens to be some code in their gem and a bunch of other gems, and you have a folder structure they give you, but that's not a requirement. And I feel like people are really not aware of that, or they don't write much regular Ruby apps themselves where they're forced to make a directory structure and extract classes and things out. um so yeah, I thought that was fun because um it feels like, when you're writing just a Ruby app directly at first, you're like, oh, it's like writing a bash script or something where everything runs from the top to the bottom, and when it hits the bottom, you're done. But like when I was going through refactoring your code there, um, I was like, yeah, this reminds me of writing a bash script. But if we go through and slowly pull these things out, for example, we're accessing a lot of the GitHub provided environment variables. Let's just make a module or a class or something as a wrapper around that, and then just toss that somewhere else, like in a different file in a class. And then that gets us like an easy way to access that and set up default values or whatever else. And then all of a sudden, you're like starting to pull this into what feels like more of an actual application. And then you can go test that kind of stuff too, a little bit easier, because you can instantiate the object and check the environment variables. Whereas, how are you going to test the script running from start to finish? It's not a modular thing, so that makes that much tougher. So yeah, that was really fun to do. And if anybody wants to watch my recording of doing that, it's up on Go Rails as the latest episode on the Rubocop linter refactoring. So yeah, I had a blast doing that. Have you guys ever done a lot of refactoring in bigger apps?
To the point where like I've gotten in trouble for doing too much refactoring. Um,
What qualifies then as too much refactoring?
It breaks.
Well, for me, it was like I had a hard time separating like building a feature and refactoring. So like I'd open up a PR and it's like, wait, what does this have to do with the feature? Kind of thing.
Okay. So you're given a feature to add, and then you're like, let me clean this up before I start, or something, or like as I'm doing it.
Yeah, as I'm doing it, and like I kind of took it too far. But
I can see that.
pretty much all I ever want to do is like refactor, which is a problem, I guess. And I try to like break that habit at work. But I think that like extends out of my obsessive compulsive disorder, to where like I like view the world a certain way and I want the code to match that view, and like I have trouble focusing when it's not. So.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the new feature pays the bills, but refactoring doesn't. Yet you still need to do some refactoring, or hopefully plenty of refactoring just to make future improvements faster. But then there's also a weird trade-off of like, how do you know if you're actually going to improve the code in the future by refactoring? Like, some things aren't as clear. You might be able to reorganize stuff, but I don't know, it might be a good refactoring given the current state of the world, but like, your boss could give you some other requirement that forces all that to be like undone, which would be bad. It's an interesting thing to balance.
I guess like one of my favorite refactors happened earlier this year, and it was a thing where like we built a feature, and we built a lot of similarly related features, and then it was like, well, these features aren't going anywhere, and we kind of have like we know how we're going to expand upon it in the future. It has a lot to do with like how we integrate with other people from Podia, and so like we wrote an abstraction for it, and like we've already added a few more integrations with it. Like it feels good. And it was like this was a good refactor, but they hardly ever go that way. So
Yeah, I've noticed that. Or like, you have to have a very clear idea of what you're going to do in the future in order to do a like really good refactoring, because you can definitely work yourself into a corner on accident, and then you're like, wow, we did this work refactoring and now we got to undo it. Yay.
so I'm just gonna light this conversation on fire. You mentioned earlier like service object stuff, like we've talked about that before. And I've been thinking a lot recently because I recently watched one of those on writing software well videos DHH made.
Yeah.
And I just struggled to want to put everything into concerns.
Well, I watched those, a couple of them. I forget, was that he did one on authentication, maybe? One of them I watched and I was like, there's a whole heck of a lot of indirection going on here. Like, it was hard to keep track of what he was looking at and how it all fit together. And I don't know, it was interesting. Like, some of the concern stuff I find useful just to organize things. Like, if you have a lot of maybe helper methods in your application controller, being able to extract those into a concern that's like, here's ones for current user or current team or current whatever. If you have those kind of helper methods, like, make a current helper concern, and then you can just put them all in one place. But
Percent.
but there's a point, where that goes overboard, and like, I felt that way reading through action text source code, because I would see like the same methods defined in 3 or 4 different places and then not know how any of the code flowed together. And it was not clear most of the time where, the entry point and the path it was going to go through was. And that was like really hard to figure out. And it felt like it was too complicated or something. And I'm curious why the design is the way it is, but yeah, it felt kind of like that. Like, there was a lot of modules and it didn't seem like they were all necessary, or or they could have been named differently or something to make it a little bit more clear how it worked together. I'm not sure.
So at my last job, because I learned Ruby by learning Rails, and I did it at my last job, and they were heavy, heavy users of service objects, but it was like the interactor pattern where you have basically a service object, but like the entry point into all of them is like a perform method. And so that was all I knew. And I didn't like the interactor pattern, but I really liked the idea of having like these basically poros everywhere that could do the basically services for you. And when I went to CodeFund, it was a massive shift because Nate largely writes software like DHH. He like really drinks like the DHH Kool-Aid. And there are no service objects and it's concerns. And so far, like at first I was pretty put off by it, but that was because we didn't even really use concerns at my last job, or at least I had never used a concern before. And like I said, it was a little off-putting at first, but once I figured out how they were doing it and kind of got the flow, like it's architected pretty well to the point that there's not really any of that duplication like you're talking about, Chris. But there are times where I'm like, okay, now there's something that I want these two things to know about. And that's when I start wanting to reach for some sort of service object outside of concern. But then I usually call Nate and he has a better way to do it, which keeps it in the concern and doesn't have a ton of duplicate code.
See, like, I don't think it's necessarily like the wrong approach. I just have trouble, like, I've never programmed that style. Like, I like modules all day. And I like concerns, and I like the API around like modules it gives. But like, I feel weird like opening a model and everything being like concerned out. I am a big fan of the interactor pattern. We use that a lot at my last job. Like being able to write these like tiny interactors. So like using the interactor gem, like these tiny little things that are like responsible for one or two things, and then like organizing them into one bigger interactor is really cool because the other thing that's nice about that is like you can pull these interactors like in a Rails console and just fire them off like if you need some logic performed, and that's really nice. And but yeah, I don't know.
You guys reminded me of, have you heard of the Gilded Rose kata?
I've heard of it, but I don't remember what it is.
I have not.
It's like it's a little programming challenge. And you have like these little, I guess you have like products and they have like a quality and stuff, and they have different price things and so on, and you have different rules for them. And the challenge is like, how do you write code to cleanly organize all these like different requirements? So for example, like um once you have these things like sell by dates and quality. So like some things degrade twice as fast after the sell by date has passed, and the quality of an item is never negative. Aged brie actually increases in quality the older it gets, and the quality of an item is never more than 50. You have these various different rules that are like, kind of challenging to implement. And I had gone and done this before just to see how I would organize it. And you look into doing um, inheritance and classes that define these methods and so on and whatever. And they give you kind of like a pretty nasty little uh, loop kind of thing with no classes originally, and like classes seem like a great way to refactor. And then Jeg, the what's his name? James Edward Gray the second has refactoring of it, where he actually creates modules for each of these things, like module better with age, and that one just implements the related stuff to updating the quality where it gets better instead of worse. And then he can go and mix in these modules into the instances based upon what they are. So if it's like, aged brie, then you include that module, and that module only contains, that code for improving things over with age, and then you can apply these things individually to your different classes and have the same interface. And it seems probably similar to um, how they're doing some of the things at Basecamp, judging by what I've seen so far. I haven't seen their code base or anything aside from the couple screencasts that I've watched, but it reminded me of that because it was like a way to mix and match these things, assuming you have a interface defined somewhere. And it may just be that I wasn't super clear watching some of the stuff about the interface, but I really do like that idea of using modules of interchangeable parts, basically, where you can say, hey, why don't we go replace this with that one? I thought that was a pretty cool thing. I'll have to share a link and we'll put that in the notes so you guys can check that out.
There was a OddV article I read. It's enough with the service objects already. I think I've talked about it before. And he talks about using mixing in code for this kind of stuff that I think he calls it these are just procedures that run. And that really helped kind of guide me there, but I don't know. I'm just lost. I'm lost in the land of programming.
Yeah, I should probably clarify. The reason I didn't like the interactor pattern is we weren't using the interactor gem. They rolled their own, and it didn't exist as a gem. It was literally just copy and pasted to each project. So there's smell number one. Smell number two was they used service objects or they use these interactors so much for literally everything, and they use them for things that it didn't make sense to use them for. Like basic calling perform is a nice pattern to have when the object you're calling is performing something, but they would just shove it into places that it didn't make sense to me at the time, and it still doesn't. I see why they did it now, because that was just a pattern that they use, and they just beat it to death almost. But I don't know, Jason, from what you're saying, I think you and I would work really, really well together, because I have incredible ADHD and I am not interested in refactoring for the most part or anything else like that. And in the time, I used to work with a guy who was very, very OCD, and we worked great together because I would come in and make a huge sloppy mess, but it would all work and I could pound it out really quickly. And then he would kind of come behind and refactor it into the way it, a maintainable way.
That's cool. Yeah. I don't know. I need to explore that more. Maybe I'll do that on my holiday break. Or maybe I'll just give in to the functional overlords and just write Elixir my entire break. And then I don't have to worry about anything ever again.
Yeah, everything's just better. I heard.
I've heard that. If
It's
you're
like
interested
magic.
in seeing, Jason, CodeFund's open source, so we have a Git repo with all the code, and everything is using concerns. So
That's actually exactly what I want. And exactly what I need is to just see a code base like that, because I haven't seen one before. And I think that might be what's so jarring when I watch those videos. Is wait a second, what's happening?
yeah, I'll put a link in the show notes, but it is jarring at first, but I think part of the thing that makes it work so well is by not having objects that have the same use, basically. So if you have two different objects and they both basically need to do the same type of thing, that's kind of a smell where you really need one object to have that, and there shouldn't be two. And I think if you can easily use concerns, I think that's an indication that you have very, very clean, semantic, well architected code. Although there are definitely things in the code base where I'm like, okay, this doesn't make sense to have in a concern. It's not really a concern. It would make sense to have this in a service object, but we just haven't had enough of them for me to really push to create some sort of service object pattern.
So let's shift gears and talk about what we're actually going to talk about today. Sorry about that. In 6 days, we will be Ruby 2.7ing. So
Yay! That's where you need sound effects.
Do what?
That's where you need the sound effects, man.
I don't know if I have any good ones for that.
You need like that yay clapping gif.
So I pulled up a Medium article because I am a professional, and it is called "What's New in Ruby 2.7," and I thought we'd just walk through, talk about those, and then celebrate using them.
Yeah, we'll try and make it like some of the new features that get added to Ruby that I don't end up using because I'm just used to doing it the old way, and try and embrace some of the new features. There's something to be said about like not always adopting those new patterns. Like if you write code that only works in Ruby 2.7, then your gem can only work for libraries and stuff that use 2.7. So you don't always want to start using that right away, but you know, it's good to get into the habit of taking advantage of some of these new features at some point.
Yeah. So first one we talked about before, pattern matching. So basically pattern matching on case statements. So like you can match on the structure of the data. So like you can get inside arrays and I assume hashes, things like that. Not much to
Yeah.
say there, I think, except I think this would be beneficial. I am a little like jealous of like Elixir's pattern matching where you can do it on like methods. And then you
Hmm.
like remove conditionals and just define the same method a few times with different arguments. I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think that's a for a code clarity perspective, it's probably a little bit easier to do it that way just because you have no conditionals, but you have to be aware of that. And then I wonder if there are times when, for example, you include a module that happens to add another, version of this method, and then all of a sudden it's calling that method and you didn't know it. Um, I wonder if there are times where you would run into issues with that or whatever. Maybe they're because I was curious why they didn't actually add method pattern matching. Um, Maybe it's just too complicated. I don't know, but this will be nice for case statements and stuff. You don't have to dig around first and then assign a variable and then check if it, the item's present or whatever. And that'll be easier to like go find what you're looking for right away in your case statement.
Next one is numbered parameters. So you get these, I guess, essentially default parameters. So if
Do
you
you know, going back real quick to case statements, do you know if you can mix and match the in? So now you have this in pattern um, keyword. Like, can you still use your case when, like when it's this class or whatever? Can you mix and match those? The example here doesn't really show any of those.
uh, I don't know. To be honest, I would think you could because I think it
Yeah, I
would
would think so.
be another type of checking.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just thought of that. I was looking at it. I was like, you know, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Have to look into that some more.
So back to number parameters. So essentially, instead of having to, I guess, define like a name when you get a block for each parameter, you can use _1, _2, _3, and so on. Which actually, I was kind of like, I'd heard about this one and looking at it kind of makes sense. Um, I don't really have a ton to say about it, but I think it's cool.
I when I saw this, I was initially kind of put off with it. Like I'm not really sure when okay, for some things, like they have an example here where they set _1 equal to 0, and then they have an array with just one item and the number one dot each block print _1. Like I get that kind of use case, but I don't. To me, it would be way harder to read the code if you're not naming your inputs or your like block parameters, I guess.
Yeah.
Depends on the context, really.
Yeah, I think the intention is like when you can't quite do a map with the ampersand symbol method call, um, when you're calling a method directly like that, this is like for those situations where you can't quite do that, but having a full name for the object is like not really necessary because it's like pretty short still, so you know what you're looping over. I wouldn't I wouldn't probably want to use this if you had several like items that you were accessing in the parameters. Like probably if you're doing more than just the first one or two, I wouldn't want to do this unless you had some really interesting metaprogramming reason for it or something. I don't know, but it doesn't quite seem like a thing you would want to use too much. Like it's a sharp knife they've given you. You can easily cut yourself with it.
I really like the examples in this because all the comments that I assume, all the comments in the code are like question marks. So it's like bad, and then the next example is good, and then they give an example of the new syntax. It's like also good question mark, and then the rest of the examples are like simpler simple one lines that can't otherwise be written. It's like nobody, I guess, really understands this feature. I don't know.
And a lot of this stuff too was heavily inspired by Perl and how it did things, and I believe you can access the parameters in a similar way. And it might just be them pulling some more features or whatever from Perl that might be useful. So that'd be a good one to go read through uh, the thread on the feature in the issue tracker for Ruby itself. I'd be curious to see the conversation about it.
Yeah, that's a good point. The next one I had not heard of, argument forwarding. And it looks like you can just pass all the arguments from a method into the next method. I assume that ... So like in the argument list, it just says ... and then the method call inside the other function is just ... and it passes keywords, arguments, and block arguments.
Yeah, it's kind of nice because it used to be that you would have to like collect all the arguments and the block and all that explicitly and then pass them over if you're doing that. So that seems useful. I don't do that very often, but if you were just writing a wrapper around another method, then yeah, totally seems good.
Sometimes I used to write, I don't really do this anymore, but I'd write plain old Ruby objects and they would use like .call. But I'd like want to instantiate an instance of that class, but still be able to just do like .call without having to do that. So like I'd write a class method .call that would take arguments and then instantiate the class with those arguments. So this would have been a good thing to have then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've done that too, like being able to call. And I think I actually had an example of that in the refactoring thing where it was like, why don't we wrap this Rubocop linter action in a class and have a .run method, and then it's like, well, our interface now is like Rubocop linter action.new.run. So if we just add a class method called self.run and that one instantiates and calls run, then we get kind of the same thing. Just a nice little wrapper for that. Um, I could see that being pretty useful, especially when you're doing on like call, which typically takes arguments. That would be helpful. Or maybe you're just maybe you're overriding a method or something and deprecating it, and so you want to wrap it, put your warning in there, and then call super with all the same arguments. That'd be an easy way of doing that too.
Yeah. Next thing, beginless ranges. I know we have endless ranges, so this one says an experimental feature still with some concerns. No earlier conversation puns intended. So the example they give is a date and a case statement, and it's like when beginless range up until 1 year ago put ancient. I don't.
Yeah.
I want to think of how I'd use that. I just don't know.
It seems a little strange that we don't just have. I don't know. It doesn't seem that unintuitive for me to just write negative infinity dot dot 1 year ago, or the vice versa for infinite ranges. So I guess it's useful. It's a little shorter, but it doesn't totally seem like it seems like it will lead to easy mistakes and typos when you write two periods on accident, and then you're like, oh, I didn't mean to make a range, I just made a typo. That just seems like it maybe should be more explicit. I'm not sure. I can understand the concerns there.
But next one, unless there's anything else to say about that, flip-flop operator. So poll between Andrew and Chris, have either of you ever used that? Because it says flip-flop operator is back.
Yeah, I tweeted about that a week or two ago, and I was like, I've never seen this before, and this looks awful. Like, and as far as I know, it was someone on Twitter said that a lot of legacy apps had used it, and they like kept it because of that. I guess I don't know. It seems like it has been removed, and then now it's back. So I don't know. The conversation was there. I would avoid them. They don't, it's like relying on some internal state of the conditional range to keep track of when the first one is passed and the second one has not. And it's like you read the code and it seems very unclear. And I would rather just have, a greater than or less than check for each of those parts of the range. And that seems easier to do for my own sanity, I feel like.
Yeah, I had never heard of it until I saw Chris's tweet about it. So it looks
What are
dangerous.
tweets?
A tweet. That is where you receive untold amount of drama, but occasionally something helpful comes over the wire.
Or good
Oh,
jokes.
nice.
Okay. Yeah, it says flip-flop operator. It comes from Perl. Probably not going to use it. Chris, great job explaining it. Array intersection. Okay, so this is cool.
Yeah, I didn't know that they didn't already have this feature. It's like well, I guess I did know that they didn't have the method named intersection, but the ampersand I had seen before. Like, what do they call that? It's the use the ampersand when you're doing. Oh, I can't remember the word for it now. Dang it! Like you use it often when you're doing. Oh, I can't remember.
Union.
Yeah. Let me look it up.
While you do that, I will explain. So intersection will compare two arrays and give you the matching values. But it's like in one of the examples, the first array is 1, 1, 3, 5, and the next one is 3, 2, 1. So it only gives you like the first match, I guess. I wonder if there were two B's in the second array. Sorry, I skipped down. If there were like 2 1s in the first array, 2 1s in the second array, it would still only return 1 1 or 2 1s. I don't know.
It looks like it removes duplicates.
That's what it looks like. So I don't know, but it's a cool feature to have nonetheless. Especially so it's now a method you can call array.intersection past another array.
Unary was the word I was looking for. Man, I haven't
I would
heard that
never,
word in a long time.
I would never guess that was a word.
Binary and unary.
Next one. So we got some enumerable methods coming up. So enumerable filter map. It says selected map are often used to transform an array while filtering some items out completely. So filter map. Okay.
Yeah,
Allows you to pair the two together to solve the problem faster. So it essentially does a select and a map. That's cool.
Yeah. Pretty nice, I think. Because then you just return what? You just return nil if you want to remove it from the resulting array, and then you're also mapping it to what value it should be at the same time. So if you want to get rid of something, you just return nil. Seems easy enough and kind of does the compact internally, I guess.
Does what it says.
Yeah.
Uh, how does this next one not already exist? Tally. So, given an array that has like A, B, C, B, A, it'll go through and tally the counts of duplicate items.
Um, I know there's like, size and stuff, but you're looking for a specific value or whatever, right? It says. So maybe that's the unique thing.
This is cool.
Yeah, I
But
can definitely see myself using this one.
This is good. I'm
yeah.
excited about this one.
Yeah, that's like, doing a group in a group and count or sum in your database queries, giving you the same kind of thing in native Ruby, which is nice.
I'm not going to pretend I even know what this next one does. Enumerator.produce will produce an infinite sequence where each next element that's my southern drawl, each next element is calculated by applying block to previous.
So obviously, this is the Fibonacci method.
I mean, it's got to be, right?
That's one of their examples there, of course. So it's cool. If you have something that if you have some sort of array or whatever, if you're looping through weeks, you can say, here's the last date, here's a week from that date. Just keep going. And if all you need to know is the previous one, that's pretty simple. So seems handy. Looks like they've gotten got a example on using it for pagination, which is nice. That's cool. That's probably one I will never end up using, but could be handy, and I'll always forget about it. Seems
it's
like one of those methods.
it's like in the movie Zoolander where they ask Hansel if what he thinks about Sting, and he says, "I respect Sting. Do I listen to his music? No, but the fact he's making it, I respect that."
Fair enough. Yeah.
Just going on record, I love Sting, and he's performing it on my birthday, and I'm like, we should drop everything and go. Next
There you
one,
go.
symbol start with and end with. So same thing as string, just to see if a symbol starts with something or ends with something. Kind of nice.
Simple enough. I don't know that I've ever actually asked a symbol that, but that's interesting. Because symbols being, static or whatever are a little bit, they're more predictable than strings. So that's kind of interesting. I guess that comes in handy somewhere, but you wouldn't know. I guess it would be a situation where you didn't know the symbol that you were receiving. Interesting.
And then it ends with keyword argument spec changes. And the little bit I've read ahead makes me want to like sob inside. So when a method call passes a hash as the last argument, and there's no keywords, there's a lot of conditionals here. Hash is the last argument, passes no keywords, and when the called method accepts keywords, a warning is admitted. Wowzers.
To continue treating as keywords, add a double splat operator to avoid the warning and ensure correct behavior in Ruby 3. Huh. So, yeah, these examples are interesting. So, you basically, if you call the method and it has keyword operators, then if you gave it an object, it doesn't like destructure the object, I guess, in that first example, and that's why it gives you the warning. Not real sure.
Yeah, so I'm not, at this point, I'm not even going to try and explain these over a podcast. But we'll link to this article in the show notes, and you can learn all about keyword arguments.
This is a little disappointing or whatever. Like, just for the simplicity of the keyword arguments and stuff, now it's like pretty strange. Or I guess maybe it's been working strangely and this is cleaning it up. That's interesting though, because it's like I'm sure that you're going to see a heck of a lot of warnings come up as you're using gems and whatever other code you've written in the past that, you know, did work just fine, but now is going to be a little strange. I'm sure that I'm like passing a hash in as keyword arguments many times, and that probably doesn't work or whatever. But yeah, that's going to be interesting.
Well, that concludes that. Happiest of holidays to both of you and anyone listening.
Yeah, you too. Take some time off. Don't do too much Elixir.
When I'm no longer a host on the show because I've started Remote Elixir, then you'll know I've gone too far.
Yeah, and then I'll be coming by with Go Elixir.
GoPhoenix.com.
And I will still be here because I'm not interested in that.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be moving over either.
I'm so interested. I just always end up like, oh, I can just do this in Ruby.
Yeah, I don't know. That brings up, if anyone hasn't read it yet, the article that DHH posted about Basecamp's spend budget to afford their Ruby code and stuff, how it's basically just a tiny fraction compared to salaries and stuff, and for the performance benefit that they get for building new things quickly, it's a great spend for them. I'll have a link in that in the notes, but that's, the common thing is, oh boy, Elixir's faster, better use that instead of Ruby.
So that's actually, oddly enough, performance is the thing I care the least about from switching to Elixir.
There you go. That's a good reason then, or better than most.
I'm just really interested in like, I have to explore for myself versus just like believing everyone, because I'm really good at just drinking the Kool-Aid, as the phrase was said earlier. But I've always been really fascinated by the people who talk about it's like easier to maintain and come back to functional code because like you have to keep less things in your head. And I'm like, that's fascinating, and I want to explore that and see what that's like.
So I have a quick note on that. So CodeFund was originally written in Elixir and Phoenix, and then Eric, who is the co-founder, hired a developer, and the developer basically wrote their own framework, like instead of using Phoenix. And it got to this huge unmaintainable mess that no one could use except for this one developer. And then Nate came on and they trashed that app and got rid of the dude who did it and rewrote it on Rails, and it's actually faster and more easy to maintain and more easy to hire.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the functional thing is you just need to understand the concept of what code might become more maintainable that way. It doesn't mean all code's going to be more maintainable. So if you can apply
Yeah.
those practices in Ruby, then you get the best of both worlds, or whatever. So yeah, this is one of those things where it's like always a good idea to go see how Laravel does things, see how Phoenix does things. Go play with all those things, and then just you're smarter by having explored all those and learned these new approaches. So it will never hurt to like go learn that stuff. And it's only going to make you a better Rails developer if you know that and Rails and keep doing Rails, or vice versa. It's always going to be good to know other options or approaches out there. So, yeah.
Yeah, I should clarify. I don't think it's like a silver bullet. I just want to learn for myself. Like, clearly people like it for a reason, and I just want to figure that out.
Yep. Yeah, I think it's a good one. And there's like a lot of underlying stuff there that they have the ability to like, run or make a deployment with like no downtime and stuff in production and like hot reload stuff, or whatever. I forget the name for that, but like there's a lot of cool stuff that Erlang has underneath just because it was built for telecom. So it's got a lot of influence from all that, which I think is really like beneficial in various different ways. So yeah, there's so much cool stuff to learn from the different approaches. It'll be great to spend some time on and understand it a bit better.
And I've written about it before, but you mentioned like learning and coming back to Ruby. There's like a subset of the community that's doing like functional Ruby, and we've had them on the show, like Solnica.
Yeah, all the dry RB guys and stuff.
Yeah, and like
Big
Hanami
fans of that.
2.0 is supposed to be a lot of dry RP. I don't know what the status is on that, but yeah, so like it's cool. Tim Riley does a lot of that stuff. God, I love and miss Tim. We should just move to Australia. I would hang out with him.
You're gonna have a Southern Australian accent then.
He can't. He spoke for Southeast Ruby, and Shannon bought these Aussie bites at Costco. It's like been a big running joke, and I guess he found some wherever he was and sent a picture to me. It made me sad.
That's awesome. Well, anything else before we wrap up and head off to the holidays?
I think this is our last episode of the year.
Ooh, that's a momentous comment there.
Yeah, we. Oh, I muted myself. We did better this year than we did last year in terms of publishing schedule. We ebbed and flowed a little bit, but pretty happy. We've had some pretty consistent people like you listening, and it's been fun. We got to meet people, even people at Southeast Ruby who like heard about us from this. So that's cool.
Yeah, and thanks to all you guys for listening. It's been what keeps us going, and it's a lot of fun to have conversations, on a regular basis. Anyways, Jason, but being able to do it on the podcast and then rope in a bunch of other listeners and stuff is really cool. So now we have Andrew and Nate on the show regularly, so it's expanding. It's going to be a good next year of podcasting and stuff, I think. I'm excited.
Yeah, and this show is how I knew Jason was a person, first off, and then got to meet him at RailsConf. And then I had heard of Chris, but got to meet him at RailsConf too. And I've been listening to this podcast since it started, and I love it. It's like I just love hearing you guys candidly talk about whatever's going on, and I hope I can start adding something to that table. But yeah, I think it's a unique podcast in the Ruby ecosystem, and I think it's awesome. I still listen to them, and even though I'm on them, but I think they're great, and I love the kind of the flow and relationship that you guys have, and I'm happy to have been brought into it.
We're glad to have you.
It's bananas that you've listened since the beginning.
I was just going to say that, we finally found out that Jason was a person, not a robot. It's been all this time he's fooled us.
Do you watch The Good Place?
No.
There's it's hard to explain, but essentially like in this afterlife it's like a computer almost, and what's her name? Oh my gosh, I'm blanking. Janet, and like there's a lot of different Janets, but one of the guys like always is like, oh, thanks girl, and she's like, not a girl, because robot. Ha 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 ha. All right, gotta go, bye.
All right. We'll see you guys later.
See you guys next year.